such nice music. I'm here for it.
That was. I don't know if that matches our vibe, but we'll go with it.
It was very soothing.
Yeah,
A
feels like
little
this would be like
bit,
a meditation podcast or
yeah,
something
like a
like
little
that.
bit spa.
ASMR discussion.
Hi.
That might be
Welcome.
customized in the future, folks.
Yeah.
We'll license some music, some cool music.
Yeah, we'll
Lots
license.
of options.
Yeah.
Tons
we
of
got
options.
we got lots of options. Hi everybody. Welcome to LessThan3NPC. A show podcast thing where three friends talk about stuff that's too serious to talk about while playing video games.
Hmm.
Requires more brain power.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
The GPU can't keep up.
We can cover a lot while we play video games, but yeah, there are some topics that we want to devote specific conversation and time and space to because they're important and they're fun, and they're complex. So that's really what this is going to be about. We think, we hope, we plan.
Yeah.
All the things.
All the things.
Yeah.
For anyone who doesn't already know us, hi, I'm Des. My pronouns are they, them. And, hi.
We'll go to the right.
I'm Joe. My pronouns are they, them as well. I don't plan my introductions, and it always fails me every time when I don't plan my introductions. So I'm a nerd on the internet. I like video games.
Yeah. And you also stream.
And I do.
So,
I stream as well. Yeah.
Hello. My name's Kara. She, her pronouns. And I also stream. But we're all friends here from in real life situations. I mean, actually, sort of. Hold on.
Sort of.
You two have not actually met.
No, not in corporeal form. So I'm still
No.
not sure Des is not some spectral internet.
We've met spiritually.
Yes, spiritually, which is half of it. So
yeah, that's most of it.
You gotta start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
But we will be meeting in February, physically in person. I'm very stoked for that. So
yes. I'm also very stoked for that. Yeah.
Should we just talk about briefly the structure of the show, just in case some folks are in here who...
Yeah, so we kind of came to, so Joe and Kara stream, on Sundays. They do their own 2NPC stream, and it's mostly playing video games. And we kind of came to this point where we were trying to talk about things that is too much brain power to talk about while playing video games, or things that were like too serious while, you're building a raft out in the ocean, trying to hunt sharks. And finding sort of a tonal issue. And we're all friends of various backgrounds, like socially, with relationships, even internationally. You two are both Canadian and I'm from the US, and we kind of wanted a space where we could talk about stuff and have conversations together and have conversations with the community and talk about stuff that maybe not a ton of other people are talking about, like, and just read their regular day to day.
Yeah.
Indeed. So yeah, I think just kind of to break it down, we're going to do, we have two subjects kind of lined up for today. And if you can read the top there, it's negotiations and consent. We're going to tackle negotiations first. And then once we're kind of like looking to have that done a little bit, then we'll kind of open it up to like questions if people have that, or open just like a discussion component where we kind of interact with people. So if you write a comment and we don't get to it, it's okay. One of us is keeping an eye out and we're going to make little notes as we go. Okay.
Yeah.
But also just try to keep up with, questions that come to mind, and then we will address it a little bit later. Yeah. Yes.
Because there's a bunch of thoughts that each of the three of us have, and so we want to kind of pick our brains, each of us, and then obviously that would spark different conversations as we go. And then if folks in the chat are sparked or inspired to contribute or ask questions or wonder about stuff, we're gonna sort of try and tackle that towards the end. I think we're going for about 90 minutes. That's what we decided.
Yeah, between 60 and 90, kind of
Yeah.
wherever we feel like it's comfy. This is our first like official show.
Yeah.
So we're kind of just playing it by ear as we go. So if there's stuff for lulls or we're trying to figure things out, we appreciate your patience and you guys hanging out with us.
Hmm.
What else? I wanted to kind of start talking about how we kind of came to negotiate the concept of the show.
Hmm.
Because our first topic's negotiation, and we kind of, because again, this all started off as kind of a joke. It was sort of a two NPC after dark situation, um, and started as sort of an in joke with the community, and it. But at some point, we did eventually have to sit down and be like, "Is this just a joke, or are we actually
Hmm.
doing a thing? And what does that look like?"
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think we were sort of going along with the joke, leaning into it on one of the streams, on one of the two NPC streams, and then um, it just felt like there was more there. I think that
Yeah,
we wanted to explore, and I think the three of us get along and have similar sort of desires to talk about um, topics that don't normally get the limelight, like as was saying earlier. Um, and so I don't know, it just felt like there was something here, and so we wanted to kind of see where it went and see how it felt and all that, and started. Yeah, I think it was. Des, I think it was your idea to have the first episode be about negotiation, and we would kind of run through a little bit about how we came up with this and why we did, and then, but then wanted to further explore that topic as by itself because it's a complex topic or can be. So.
So I know initially, um, we kind of had a discussion about, well, like when the stuff that we want to discuss on the show, like we really want to go through relationships and we want to talk about social stuff and we want to talk about um, sort of the inner workings of people's lives and especially of like from our experiences and with that sometimes sensitive or heavy topics can come up. So one of the big things that we talked about was like negotiating our hard limits and our boundaries,
Hmm.
and a lot of that stuff I learned personally because I am an adult video producer and I work in the kink community and I work in the fetish, and I've been living the kink lifestyle for most of my adult life. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, so that was sort of the first thing we talked about um, when coming up with this whole thing, like coming up
Hmm.
with like doing the negotiation for the show.
Yeah. In terms of myself, I spent nearly a decade within the sort of sexual violence advocacy community, and primarily as an educator, did some frontline crisis work, but a lot of my time was spent educating folks on the realities and nature of sexual violence, and a big part of that is consent. And a big part of that is sort of educating people on kind of how to respond to disclosures of sexual violence. And so, really, what that meant was how to have tough conversations, um, or not tough conversations, just really personal and vulnerable conversations. And so, a lot of it had to do with how do you respond to somebody who's disclosed that they've experienced some form of sexual violence. And so, um, what are the things that are important to talk about, to the groundwork we're supposed to lay out? How do you make someone feel comfortable? How do you build trust with somebody around something so personal? um, and so that's really kind of where I'm coming from in terms of this conversation. And so that's the knowledge that I'm bringing. Kara, what about you?
I just make movies.
Come on, Kara. Come on.
No, I mean, like, I don't have a source base. Like, I'm walking into this with just learning to be a more open and vulnerable person in general, and I've always been a very curious person. um I enjoy storytelling and all those things. So it's just kind of like navigating what that world looks like, and then just being in a space where I can practice that, but also be around people whom I trust to have
Hmm.
these types of conversations with. And in terms of like negotiations, it's just kind of like learning to have the skill set to do that in general is a very challenging thing. Uh, I think for most people until you start practicing it, like anything else.
Hmm.
So that's kind of why I think navigating this type of platform is kind of like super anxiety riddled for me. Um, but we're gonna go with it and we're gonna see what happens.
Hmm.
So
What?
yeah.
Anxiety? None of us
Yeah,
deal
I
with
don't know
anxiety
what
here.
that is. But yeah,
Nope.
no, it's just it's a really good way to expand experience and just have these conversations and see where it
Hmm.
goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was
Um,
actually thinking about Carrie Fisher's sort of one of her quotes, one of her famous quotes, uh, just because I was navigating some butterflies, I guess, before this, and but I was remembering hers is be afraid, but do it anyway.
Right.
And I butchered the quote, but like that's the gist of what it is. And so I just thought, it's good to step out of your step out of your comfort zone from time to time, and um, just to see how far you can expand.
yeah.
Yep.
And I mean, that was also like a huge part of the negotiation process, even coming up with this show, was that the three of us know each other and the three of us trust each other to not venture into or to like accept each other without judgment, to assume positive intent,
Hmm.
to not get in a huge argument or say something shitty. Like we all trust each other and we all know each other, and that was sort of a huge part of starting this thing together. I wouldn't like, I wouldn't volunteer to sit like and talk to randos on the internet about very vulnerable things. Um, I mean, I'm
No.
pretty shameless, but I'm not that shameless. Like that seems like a lot of work, and
Well, it is navigating what that looks like too, right? Like for
Hmm.
some people, it's very easy. And whether or not that's healthy or not is another question. But it's, you do have to ask, the point of how do you have these conversations, or if you have curiosities about certain topics, and then be in a place where you can ask the questions and know that someone's not going to bite your head off, right?
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
at the same time, also be like realistic with the fact that you should do your own research for some things and then approach a topic. Typically,
yes.
is a good method. So there's that
Hmm.
too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have looked into this a little bit. I have some questions.
I have some questions. This is coming from a place of ignorance and understanding. Please be gentle.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah,
yeah.
um, and what was I gonna say? Um, yeah, we don't really, and this is negotiation in general. Like when it comes to like, hey, I'm stating my needs here. Like, what are your needs? I want to meet somewhere in the middle, or these are the things I can't budge on. These are the things I can budge on. It's often seen as like an aggressive thing. Like the before
Hmm.
learning negotiation in the sex positive sense, I always learned it as like a job thing. It's
Hmm.
like like there's like manipulation tactics where you got to start high and then negotiate to a lower rate, and then like it always seemed very aggressive, like it was something that like you only when you knew exactly what you needed, and like when you were trying to get something out of another person did you force them into a position to
Hmm.
negotiate, which isn't how that should happen with regular people.
Hmm. Well, I mean, the other thing is we come from a culture that doesn't barter.
Yeah.
Do you know what I
Hmm.
mean? I mean, in lots of places in the world, everything is bartered, right? So that's a common negotiation tactic that just happens on a day to day basis. Whereas for us, uh, in the states and Canada, most things that we purchase, it's kind of like that's the set price, so there is no negotiations on it. But in a professional sense, like Des is saying, like I remember when I was a young professional, like I graduated from college when I was 20, and got straight into a very, very corporate setting. And I went like 3 years without negotiating a rate increase because I
Hmm.
didn't know how,
Yeah.
or the fact that I was even allowed to go do that. Right. And I always joke, I'm like, I went to film school, I didn't go to business school. So it's it's a
Which
very
is
different
fucked.
approach. Yeah. So when I approached the manager that I had at the time, because I was a contractor, it was like a permanent contract. It's very weird. That's a different story to talk about the abuses of corporate Canada. But anyway, um, like I was literally having a massive anxiety attack before this meeting was set up. I had no preparation at all because I've never had a mentor to teach me how to do that, or like even peers within my group didn't have a job like that. They were all wage workers. My parents are both like employee type roles, so they never had to do, like, it was kind of like more of a meeting that you would talk about rate and increases like that. So I remember kind of like being this weird floating entity in this office, and I'm like shaking when I'm like, can I have a dollar increase an hour? And the manager being like, yeah. And I was like,
Okay.
okay. And um and then the following year I was just like, oh shit, like, no, it's Kara, it's not $1 that you asked for. Like, you asked for $5, $6 an hour. Like, this is the increments that you missed. You you missed a whole bunch of years. Um but yeah, like even to today, it's a hard thing to do when you approach like clients and stuff like that. You start saying like, this is the rate that I have available to you. I'm open to negotiations.
Hmm.
And that's usually this weird world where it's kind of intersecting between the scale of a job versus the type of job it is versus who the client is.
Yeah.
So
Because, like,
that's kind of
you,
how I see it.
especially like in like film, it's like you have your whole like breadth of skill set, but if they're only using 25% of your skill set, they're not going to want to pay 100% of your rate.
Hmm.
Exactly.
Um,
And that's kind of really anything that comes down to when you're creating content or developing, programming, all that stuff, right? Like even
Hmm.
as an educator, Joe, even though you were in kind of a setting of it, like you would have different clients asking you for like different specific needs for different presentations, like
Hmm.
depending on where you were going. So like
Hmm.
that's in a component of professional setting, that's still negotiations.
Well, and just in that setting too, sometimes negotiation can feel or seem like an inconvenience. Um, and like I remember, like a lot of the requests that we used to get for presentations on sexual violence, regardless of the specific topic it was, a lot of people didn't even know what they were asking us for. And so initially, as green educators, we just went in and we just did our presentation, and it worked, but it really didn't meet the needs of the group we were presenting to. It really took us negotiating and saying, okay, you want a presentation, why though? What's why is this coming up in your community? What do you need from us? What are you looking to get out of this? What are you looking to leave with? um, because those are all important questions that help us create a better workshop and help you get something out of the exchange. um, but there were people we ran into that were really annoyed by it. It's like, well, just do the presentation, just do this, you know. And I think that's there was different expectations that they were coming to us with and that we had of the exchange. And I think um, that's part of it, is knowing your expectations, what your expectations are. And there's a degree of self-awareness there I think is really important, that isn't easy to come by usually.
no,
Mhm.
it's really hard to, well, like on a personal level, it's kind of hard to know what you want, especially if
Hmm.
it's something that's new that you've never experienced before. You don't know what level of investment you're willing, or what level of vulnerability you're willing to have with certain um with things, whether it's like relationship wise or whether it's like friendships or even sexual. Like
Hmm.
if you don't know, then you kind of don't know what level of engagement that you're even willing to have with the thing. But even that knowledge, like being like, I don't know, I have an interest in this thing, I don't know how
Hmm.
far I want to go in it, is still 10 times better than having no fucking clue and being like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it seems like fun. Uh,
Yeah.
But there's always that pressure when, like, specifically talking about a professional sense, right? Because it's not just like your professionalism, it's also like your competency that comes into effect at that point. It's just how competent are you at negotiating not only your rate and what you're going to be paid, but it's just like, do you even see me as a professional if we can't have this negotiation,
right.
Hmm.
right?
Like, what
Like,
is the power dynamic there?
Yeah.
exactly. I've had clients who, like, full spectrum of clients. I've had people who have been like an absolute gem to work with. It works on the same level. It's like bringing things to the table, saying, this is what we need, this is the service that you're going to provide, and we gel, and it's great. And these are typically my long lasting clients. Whereas I've had like people on the flip side who have like messaged me back and say, this isn't what you quoted, I'm not paying you. And you go, um, well, I have this list of emails talking about the current state of my rate and everything that I was going, and I updated you as we were going along. And
Hmm.
you knew that this was going beyond scope because you made me re-edit a video from scratch. So, like, that's where you get into that really strange place where negotiation doesn't become only just a tool to like have good relationships with people, but you're also asking like, what is your professional level? What is your your people skills capable
Hmm.
of doing? And if it's actually manipulative, right? Like that one client who's just like, oh well, I'm not paying you that rate. I'm paying you what you wrote on your quote.
Hmm.
And you go, well, you know what? That's bullshit. I'm never going to work for you again. I want the money that you're at least going to pay me. I'm not going to fight with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not worth it. Now, if it was like a massive project and we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars, then yeah, you fight for that
Oh
because,
Yeah.
yeah.
you know, that's a thing. But yeah.
It's so funny how, like, because like in the beginning I did say that it was like different, but it is super similar to negotiating in relationships, because the fact that the negotiation, like the update of like, okay, this is my rate now, or like, here, you've changed these things, so I have to change these things, is that the negotiation, like once you've entered a relationship with someone, is kind of never ending. It's just sort of updating each other on your status and being like, cool, so we've
Hmm.
gotten this far with this thing, but you know, maybe like this is too much or this is outside of my range. And then when someone pushes back on that, that is a manipulative and a toxic person. They're like, no,
Yeah.
no, 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 it's what I want. Then the negotiation's over. It becomes just um, emotional blackmail.
Hmm.
Right. And it's a thing where that is tough for some people to see happen while they're
Hmm.
in it.
Oh
Right? And
Yeah.
yeah,
that's where we see the cyclical stuff happen, right? Where
yeah.
someone will come back and be like, "Well, they did this." And you're like, "Hello?" Like, duh, that's not a good line to step across. And then they'll be like, "Oh, no, it's fine. We'll figure it out next time." And you go like, "Okay,
Hmm.
but we need to talk about a negotiation isn't to say that there can't be like leniency and what is the word I'm looking for? Compromise, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to navigate that line and balancing that for each person in like even in friendships. Like there was a lot of times when I was younger where I just let some friendships go because it was constantly like, I'm approaching you, I'm offering this is what
Hmm.
I was looking for. And then over, I mean, like talking like a lot of years, like 6, 7, 8 years, it was never reciprocated. It was never like taking the initiative to be interactive with me. And then when I got into my older teens, I was saying, I wish you all the best in your life,
Hmm.
but I know I'm not going to hear from you because that's too much work for you to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of want to connect it back to something that Des had said a little bit earlier about um, it really, like, it's hard to know what you want. And I think when it comes to negotiations, knowing what you want to get out of something is a huge part of it. But we don't necessarily live in a society that creates a lot of space for that kind of self advocacy. And I think something that I want to kind of point out or talk about is that from when we're tiny little humans, we're not taught negotiation. We're taught to obey, right?
Yeah.
Now, in a lot of ways, like following our parents' guidance is supposed to be a positive thing, but there's all these little ways in which some of some of those lessons kind of go too far, like because I'm thinking about like go give grandma a kiss or go give uncle a hug or what have you, um, and the kid says no. There's no room to say no,
Right.
and what that teaches us as little humans is that, well, I can't trust my own feelings then, and I think that's sort of the base level. And I think if there's any areas in which a person is marginalized, there's more layers of, I don't want to call it gaslighting, but it is really, of you, we're going to deny your actual feelings. And so I think for myself, I have ADHD. It's a neurodivergency. Um, my whole upbringing was teachers and people in authority positions telling me how I feel, how I felt, and why I was doing what I was doing. And whenever I tried to open my mouth to advocate for myself and saying, actually, that's not how I was feeling, the fact that I forgot to write my homework down doesn't mean I don't care about school. There was no space for that. There was no space for me to push back and say, wait, I didn't do that because I don't care about school.
Mm-hmm.
I did that because my brain literally didn't have space for it.
Right.
But again, there's all these little stages in which there's no opportunity to learn how to negotiate. And I think that's something that many of us come to later in life. And I think if it was introduced earlier in life, um, it wouldn't solve all the problems, but I think it would make things a little bit easier moving forward or growing up or what have you.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot, like, when you come to the table to negotiate in whatever scenario, it's like you have to have some sort of self-confidence in, like, maybe if it's not the exact thing what you want to feel about it, um what your limits are, what tone you want to set for whatever's
Hmm.
happening, like, and ultimately what your goals are. And if you don't know any of those things, and if you have no scope of any of those things, like, because nobody taught you, like, hey, you should figure these things out for yourself, and if you're allowed to figure these things out for yourself, then you don't know how to negotiate. And then people who do know how to negotiate, or know how to sort of run roughshod over you, take
Hmm.
advantage of you.
Yeah. It's
Or you did the opposite, or you ended up running roughshod over other people
yeah,
because you have no idea what they want.
yeah. It's about tuning into those internal feelings and trusting those feelings, right? And then when you've been conditioned or taught not to trust those feelings, then negotiation as an adult is really difficult. And again, like we've been talking about, we negotiate as adults every moment of our lives, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I kind of like the visual of like if you were, walking to a table and the people whom you were entering a negotiation with are also at that table, but then someone just sits there with the like not the same level of commitment to the negotiation or the same level of interest in the conversation. You're entering into a kind of inequality of purpose,
Hmm.
right? Like you're sitting down at this table with the hopes, and this is where trust comes in a lot of times with negotiation, is the hope is that we're there for the same reason,
Hmm.
Hmm.
right? And that's even kind of where a tangent of communication comes into negotiations. It's like, how do I even communicate to this person? Like, this is why I'm here. This is why I
Hmm.
want to have this conversation. And what is this going to look like on the other end of it? Right? Are we willing to listen to things that maybe we don't really feel um, comfortable listening to? Right? Like that's
Hmm.
can totally send a derailment to negotiation really easily. Is like, you know, family dynamics is a great one where where we talk about, when you're younger, like, oh, I don't want to hug Uncle Bob or whatever it is. But it's even when you get older where you're just like, I don't want to participate in this family event because the people who are around me make me uncomfortable.
Hmm.
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 And then you have the parts of your family that recognize that and they say like, but why? And then that's a requirement of vulnerability to explain to these people who you're trying to communicate that to. But at the same time, you're also sitting on there and you're like, are they receiving the magnitude of what I'm telling them?
Right.
Hmm.
right? And that's always really hard when you interact with the emotional level component that intersects with negotiation,
Yeah.
right?
Well, Care, I just want to jump on that vulnerability point because that's where my mind was going, was like they're all like when it comes to negotiation, yeah, trust is part of it, but like on my end, I need a certain comfort level with being vulnerable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not comfortable being vulnerable, then that building trust almost becomes irrelevant, because if I can't be vulnerable, then I there's really it's non-starting, right?
Yeah.
And I know for myself, like it's been a lot of work to ease into that vulnerability. I turtle. I know I turtle a lot when confronted with somebody who has expectations from an exchange that are not congruent with my expectations, and that's very overwhelming for me. And
Mm-hmm.
because again, I haven't really, I'm learning to be more vulnerable in my, or to be more comfortable in my vulnerability.
Can you
Um,
explain turtling a little bit?
so capitulating to other people's needs and to just going along with what other people want, not advocating for myself, because it's easier to do that um, than it is to sit in a vulnerable place and say, I don't like this and I'm not going to be a part of it, or I don't want to be a part of it.
Hmm.
Um, because in those exchanges, again, these were mostly when I was younger, when I didn't have a more mature lens to kind of look at and tune in with myself. It took me till I was, you know, 30 or so in counseling to start really checking in with my own needs and stuff like that. So it was always easier for Tiny Joe to just say, sure, yep, okay, and go along with it and not make
Right.
a big deal. It was safer
Yeah.
because pushing back or advocating for what I wanted, I got all kinds of shit. Um, and as an empathic ADHD person, emotional regulation is difficult for me. And so I would get blasted with disappointment, frustration, anger. Um, and that was very overwhelming for me to manage. And so turtling was a survival mechanism to get through those moments.
Yeah. It's like one of those things that, something you said earlier, um, like that they don't teach this kind of thing in school. Like they don't,
Yeah,
they
not even close.
no, like they don't teach any of this to us when we're little. Like
Well,
it would be so nice.
yeah, but here's the thing though. No one taught most humans how to do this,
No.
right? Like when we talk about real secure, healthy development and communication and negotiation skills, the majority of us are not taught this. So how can our, especially when we're little, how do we look at the people in power to be like providing us that knowledge?
Hmm.
And the reality is like it's not really there. Not really. But
No.
it's slowly changing now that people are kind of being conscious about it, right? And having
Yeah.
conversations and growing and developing it.
Hmm.
And
Cuz
I
like
don't know.
how many relationships do you know of where it's like one person is clearly the boss and then the other person, and I'm not talking about in like a power, like a consensual power dynamic sort of way. Like one person is clearly the boss and the other person is clearly the submissive, and like they kind of just go along with whatever that is
Hmm.
because that's what's comfortable.
Like are we talking about like across the board, like professionally,
Yes.
personally,
Hmm.
everything?
Relationship. Yeah.
Maybe like 3,
Really? I feel
maybe. I wouldn't even know for sure because I've never talked to them about it. But
I feel like in, like, especially in like the hetero spaces that I've been in, like I feel like that's sort of a typical thing. Is like one
Hmm.
person is kind of clearly the boss and the other person is kind of just like going along with whatever that is. And
mm,
not in like a way that was negotiated. It's just a very dominant personality type took a very submissive personality type, and there wasn't really any sort of negotiation that happened. It just fell into whatever was comfortable, whether or not it actually benefits them or not. And then
Hmm.
eventually, whoever is getting run roughshod over builds resentment, because if you don't have those conversations, if you don't negotiate what you need, if you don't speak your own needs, then you eventually build resentment, and then things blow up, or one person pushes it too far because they weren't listening or you weren't talking.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Well, I think in that moment too, once that resentment builds to a point, like even I have my breaking points for that resentment to build, and then it looks like out of the blue, I'm suddenly being an asshole for advocating for myself when
Mm.
I've just had enough. And up until that point, it's been thing after thing after thing after thing, and I finally start advocating for myself and to people around me who are used to me being, capitulating to other people's needs. Now it's like, Joe, why are you being so mean? What's going on? This is sort of character for you. Why are you doing this to us?
Hmm.
Um, and and that becomes even more of a tricky situation. And then I have to apologize, feel guilty, and go through
Yep.
the whole
Hmm.
gamut of negative emotions. Um, and uh, and then it's usually I'll internalize a lot of that and say, well, yeah, I was being totally unreasonable, and why did I have to lash out like that, and all that stuff, and I'll fall right back into the old
Preaching
ways. Yeah.
to the choir, my friend.
Yeah, I had
Yeah.
a little bit of a different coping mechanism, but still was fairly isolating.
Yeah,
But
just break off and run.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, mine was divert. Um, it wasn't to appease to anyone. It was to just keep moving and avoid it. So, like that was the easiest way to just get around, negotiations. Like I remember in school too, like elementary school, grade 5 or 6, and we were doing this project on the Greek gods, and the group that I was set in was like negotiating around like who's going to do what, how are we going to bring this all together. And I remember this very vividly that like the day before or 2 days before the assignment was due, they brought forward the two pieces, and I realized that they had just like this. The beginning of the internet was at this time, folks. Okay, so like very few sources that you can pull information from. Um, they had just uh, basically copy and pasted stuff from the internet. So they didn't write their own assignment, they didn't do all that stuff, and I found this out. And I was just like, I don't want to negotiate this. Like I don't want to be associated with this group. I don't want to be part of this project. I don't want the grade that it's going to get. So I remember having this huge thing where I was trying to divert and go around all of it by just going to my mom and being like, I'm going to do this project on my own and I got to start from scratch. And she's like, well, what did your teacher say about that? And I said, I didn't tell my teacher. Right. And so she's like, you have to tell your teacher tomorrow. So the day before the assignment was due, I walked up to her, and this is where the negotiation and power dynamics is very interesting, because for me, I look at myself as like I can't negotiate with my teacher,
Hmm.
No.
right? Like that's not an available thing for me, and especially as a 11-year-old,
Yeah. You're a
you're
child.
you're a child, so you go into this, and where I remember being like, how do I get away with this by trying to do the right thing, by taking the my own initiative and creating this project on my own without saying I don't want to be part of this group because they just
Because they cheated.
plagiarized. And then have these two guys in my class probably torment me for the rest of the year.
Hmm.
um so it's stuff like that where, like, yeah, when I think about negotiation skills and stuff, it's just like it's never um an easy thing for humans to approach
No.
when we're not given the guidance, um and the dynamic of how fast it can go from like this is legitimate, this is really good for all parties involved, to mismanagement and abuse is like, it's scary how
Hmm.
fast it can go from one to the other.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on that note, then, because I'm
Mm.
looking at our fancy, handy dandy little spreadsheet here, healthy
Mm.
versus unhealthy negotiation. Because Tara,
Ah.
while you were talking, I was thinking about, um, and as I mean, spoiler alert, I'm a very staunch anti-capitalist, and I was just thinking about the ways in which negotiation has been, I think, co-opted by like the hardcore business approach, where negotiation is about dominating the conversations, about
Yeah.
dominance and getting what you want and all that kind of stuff. Very, again, very capitalist um, framework. And so, like when I think of Kara, like in your instance, like there was elements of unhealthy negotiation. I think of about advocating for teachers myself. Um, there was very much unhealthy elements of negotiation. So I'll just throw it out to both of you and just what what is that difference between healthy, unhealthy negotiation?
Well, it's definitely unhealthy negotiation happens when two people are negotiating from two different places in sort of a power structure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like you said, you're 11, you can't negotiate with your teacher. That's not like a thing. Like,
No.
or even like, even in relationships, we talk about, people having relationships at work. It's like, if that person's your boss, can you actively and can you advocate for yourself in a way that is like strings free or
Mm-hmm.
not? Because that power dynamic is so different that you're worried about, well, if I ask for this, or if I push too hard on this, or if I say no to this, will this affect my job, or
Mm-hmm.
will this affect some other aspect of my life? Even
Yeah.
things when it comes down to like somebody's status within a friend group. Like if
Mm-hmm.
you're new to the friend group and you start dating someone who's been in the friend group for a long time, then like how you act within the relationship affects how the rest of the friend group will treat you because of what that other person says. And it's like, if you don't acknowledge that ever, and if you don't like come to the table on as equals, then the negotiation sort of just doesn't work, because you can't, like, you can't put yourselves on equal footing.
Mm-hmm. So I think like what I hear there, like if there's a power difference, and I think there's power differences all over the place. I think the person with more power needs to be kind of aware that they do hold more power. So I'm thinking about like when I think about the boss, employer employee dynamic, it would be incumbent on the employer to be aware that they have more power in that exchange.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that would go for any interaction, right, where there's that power imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is like intent.
Hmm.
So when people are approaching negotiations, it's first off, it shouldn't be a surprise that a negotiation is about to happen. Like that's the very first thing that should come up. Because you have people too, like I remember in a professional sense, just having the hardest time like bringing up money,
Yeah.
mm,
being like, ah, okay, we've talked about this project and I'm so amped up and this is gonna be awesome. Now I gotta tell you how much it's gonna cost. Are you gonna hate me? I don't know. Um, so there's like components of that. So like it shouldn't be a surprise. Those with power should recognize that they are the one walking into something with a little more kind of on their side of things. And then the intent. Like the intent
mm-hmm,
should be everyone should be able to walk into this, be heard, and then walk away from it. Right. And
Yeah.
mm-hmm,
that's not like a literal thing, like, but it's more like when you approach something, you are delivering your intent, what you want, proper communication, and then the negotiation. Hand off a few things, maybe gain some things in other departments, and then it's supposed to be that everyone's happy with
Yeah.
what's about to go down.
Yeah.
Um, but it's surprising how much that probably doesn't happen because, like for instance, like my anxiety around negotiating is evident because of those scenarios not being proper,
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
right? So it's a thing that I think the more we talk about and approach, and again, it's just like I feel like if you approach a negotiation with the intent of making sure that you walk away with more than another person or less, with like giving out less than you think this person deserves, like that's malintent.
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I think that's kind of prolific in certain industries, especially. And then I can also imagine on relationship, like when we talk about intimate partners and stuff like that, like that's where things can get very, very, very delicate.
Yeah.
Um, And if you're not willing to sit at that table and navigate how people communicate different ways, you're going to run into some problems.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and like how you communicate a negotiation is huge. I've known partners that were so conflict averse because negotiation is very often seen as some form of conflict, that like having any sort of negotiation conversation had to happen over text, like where they could
Hmm.
sit down and where they could write out their thoughts, and then like we could go back and forth in a way that also because I've been with partners who've been in abusive relationships, having that sort of written record of what was discussed and what was actually negotiated
Mm,
was important to them for their like for just their own trust and safety based
yeah.
on previous experiences, which I was happy to do with them, even though I don't feel like I need to sit down and write a thing out. I would much rather talk to a person in person. Like I just sort of operated on their in their safety zone because I want them to feel like they can come to me with whatever they need to come to me with, so
Hmm.
that the negotiation is good and I'm actually getting honest communication out of them.
Hmm. Yeah.
So people communicate in lots of different ways,
Yep.
and you got to kind of meet them where they're at on that.
Well, and I think that's an important element of healthy negotiation, is that you're willing to, like you say, meet somebody where they're at. So, um, eh, making accommodations for somebody else is not capitulating. And so, like when I think about that, like that really unhealthy capitalist, I need to dominate this negotiation. Um, that's not present in a healthy negotiation. In a healthy negotiation, there's that willingness, and I would say a degree of humbleness, to move into and discuss what's taking place. Because I think if somebody's coming to us with a big scary we need to talk kind of thing, I think there's immediate sense of defensiveness, right? And I don't want to be the bad guy here. I don't want, what do you mean we need to talk, what's going on?
I hate that so much.
And the person who's coming to us is just like, hey, it's just this thing, and I need to talk to you about it, because I don't want this to build up. I don't want this to become a piece of resentment, right? And so we need to check in with ourselves when that, yeah, I'm thinking now, talking clearly about relationships here, when that moment happens, to be humble and say, okay, I really do need to give some space to this and to hear this person out, because this is clearly important to them.
Yes.
And that's what I would highlight as being, or I would put out there as being healthy, is that willingness to hear somebody out, and to hear that maybe we have been hurting somebody inadvertently, or
Right.
doing something problematic that is not okay, you know? But that's not necessarily a defining aspect of who we are. I think it becomes a defining aspect if we get our defenses up and we aren't willing to hear what they have to say, right? Then that comes of something that defines who we are.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
if we are willing to be humble and hear, and you know, hear them out, I think that's different.
Yeah, if your insecurities override listening to another person, then that's not a negotiation anymore. It becomes an argument.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, I'm thinking like the smallest example of that right now is like I spent years trying to explain to my mom to be like, never ever, she used to do this thing. She'd just be like, call me. And that
I
would be
hate that.
that would
Oh
be the
my god. We need to talk. Call me. Fuck off.
and it wasn't until like 2 or 3 years ago that I actually was able to have like a sit down conversation. And it was just like being honest. I'm like, Mom, you may not think this, but when you text me that, I think the worst thing has happened,
Yes.
or something terrible is going to happen. It
Yeah.
needs to be, call me. I need to talk to you about helping you go buy a pair of shoes. Like
Yes.
that's you know, because FYI, I hate shopping. My mom helps me with my shopping still. I'm not embarrassed about that. Anyway, um, so but to her, it's just like, call me, let's make plans,
Yeah.
right? So it's kind of navigating like the simple things in life that for so long, like almost 26, 27 years at that point,
Hmm.
I never had the opportunity to just tell my mother, I need you to not text me, call me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? It needs to be call me, comma,
Yeah.
something else.
Synopsis of what you want. Yeah.
Yes. So, these are examples. These are the little things that
Yes.
can transform into the big things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a very similar thing with my dad, where my bio dad, he would do that too. He would do the call me, or like, I need to talk to you or whatever. And like, I was pretty okay with it because I was just like how he communicated with me. So like, that was just my dad. That was fine. It was whatever. And then my mom died. And ever since then, it's like he would be like, "Call me. We need to talk." But it's like, you can't do that to me. I'm going to assume the worst.
Yes.
I have had a bad experience in this. I need you to just add something at the end that's like, "Everything's okay. I just want to
Hmm.
talk to you because because I miss you."
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing too, is like the experience of technically and specifically traumatic experiences with these little short messages is very real. Like
Yeah.
it can be repetitive in a sequence that you're not shaking it just because someone's just like, oh, I'm just telling you to call me, like that's all it is.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, if you analyze it, you're just like, no, I associate this kind of communication with bad messaging,
Mhm.
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
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 Um, it's we're about 50 minutes in. Do we want to take questions?
See
Yeah?
if people have thoughts. I've been kind of trying to keep an eye on chat. It feels like
Yeah,
a
me
lot of
too.
people have different um, ways of approaching negotiation and conflict. It looks like there's people that respond differently to different um, sort of unhealthy negotiations. Some people turtle, some people avoid. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but specific questions or thoughts that people have.
Yeah.
Curious. Yeah.
Let us know. We'll still kind of keep talking, but we'll kind of be
Yeah, there's
interacting
always
with
a
the chat a
delay.
little bit more.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah. The
Any other examples of negotiation in our lives that you want to talk about? Funny, sad, important?
uh,
Not specific examples coming to mind, but again, for me, it's more been, I think, the things that come around are general stuff around neurodivergence and ADHD and stuff like that. How there was no space, because I think for the most part, a lot of people still don't believe that ADHD is a thing, and um, I just need to try harder. That's the biggest gaslighting thing that I got around that, is that I just need to try harder. And again, I was negotiating for simple stuff like, hey, I just need extra time on a test, or I just need, I don't know, reminders on homework assignments or something like that. It was a little easier in university, but I still had to go to like student services and all that kind of stuff. And I still felt a lot of shame around that. Yeah, I go write my exams in a different room because I need that
mhm.
accommodation. You know, I felt guilty around accommodation. I think that's another element of, not to double back on stuff, but that's another unhealthy component, is if somebody makes you feel guilty for having
Yeah.
advocated for yourself. you know
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I have a very good friend who whenever she went to college, she had to do sort of the same self-advocacy because she is disabled, and needed like extra time for tests, and
hmm
needed extra stuff, and but for like the first semester could not like go and do that negotiation and like have that conversation with like student services or whatever. And it got to the point where it was like we kind of had to sit her down and be like, "You need these things." Like, we love you. Your needs are valid. Go ask for them.
hmm hmm
It's gonna be okay. And it was fine. They gave her all the accommodations she needed, and like got the rest of her schooling done, and it was totally fine.
yeah.
But it's
Hmm.
like it's that anxiety about like especially with the power dynamic of like that being a person of official capacity within the school, and
Yeah.
like if you say you have an issue and then something happens because of your issue, then they can point to that and see like, see, you already knew that this is a problem, you should have fixed it previously.
hmm
Like,
Well, I was just going to bring that up around sometimes feeling really frustrated when I'd encounter people that are like, well, why didn't you just ask? It's like, I didn't ask because I've had, 25 years of people telling me that my needs were bullshit, right?
Yeah.
So I was afraid of asking. So
Yeah.
don't gaslight me on being afraid to ask, damn it.
Yeah. No, it's a skill set, right?
Mhm.
And if there isn't positive experiences with negotiating, it develops the anxiety,
Hmm.
right? And it develops the repetitive behavior tactic that you use that feels most natural to you,
Mhm.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, I want to try to do the thing that I just figured out that I could do.
oh shit, that's cool.
That's fancy.
So fancy.
This is perfect for question period.
This is perfect for
We
question
we
time.
are figuring this out as we go, people, and this is very exciting for all of us. So,
Oh
It's
yeah,
very exciting.
look at this.
so putting yourself in other people's shoes, yeah, I think that's kind of what I was getting at earlier with the sense of humbleness, right? I think if you put yourself in the other person's place and try and see what they want to get out of it and why they would
Mm,
want that, and I think that's part of, I think the best thing to do is to hear them out and to really
Yeah.
internalize that. But I think it is like to see it from their side of things can help us, again, check that ego a little bit, um, when those moments come up.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Negotiation is always a trust exercise, and if it's a domination thing or if it's a manipulation thing, then it's a fight. It's not a negotiation.
Yeah.
It's a battle.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? Some of us don't want to go through our lives constantly fighting other people.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Because being
that's an
alive is
interesting.
exhausting.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
It's
Well,
already
and
exhausting.
not to go down a huge rabbit hole because this could go very far down. But on that topic of some people don't know anything else. So that's how
Yeah.
you get people who are on repetitive arguments, right? And
Yeah.
that's the only way that they know how to communicate. And that's obviously drives like major rifts in relationships and, uh, you know, on all the different type of platforms of
Yeah.
life. Um, and I think the only way you kind of as an individual, if that's you, the only way you can kind of dissolve some of that aggression is by seeing other people do it properly,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's that environment of if you don't know any other like if you don't know any difference, that's just the life that you're going to believe. You're going to believe like being in an intimate relationship is just arguing all the time.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
normal, right? And it's not until you see someone like witnessing a negotiation happening in real life almost that you start restructuring in your brain. You're like, oh shit,
Mm-hmm.
there is a different way to do it.
Yeah.
There's a better way to do it. But you have to be willing to put the work in to learn how to do that.
Because it's not easy. Once you've figured out that like you can just steamroll over people, or you can or it's easier to just turtle, then like it's hard to come out of that cycle of whatever you're doing. Like because even like the act of like domineering over people in a negotiation in itself is like an insecurity thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I don't trust you to give me what I want or what I need unless I use some sort of tactic on you.
Yeah. I mean, I was actually just going to go there, Des. Like, I think and again, this is not meant to provide an excuse for abusive behavior, but I think a survival strategy is to dominate conversations, right?
Mhm.
And to dominate negotiations. Because if you've grown up with certain abuses where you didn't have control over your lived experience and didn't have control over your life, um, once you get a sense of power or control, then leaning into that can be a way to keep yourself safe, right?
Mhm.
So again, I don't want to. I mean, it's different. I don't want to offer that as an excuse for abusive behavior, but I think it can explain a little bit of where somebody might be coming from. Um, but again, that doesn't excuse if they then choose to go and abuse other people. That doesn't excuse that behavior either.
Right.
I think again, it's more complex than somebody is the way that they are because of their past, like, well, yeah, but they're still accountable for their
Of
actions
course.
in
Oh
the here
yeah.
and now, right?
Yeah. I think it's more about having the conversation so that some people can be either able to reflect back on themselves to analyze their own behaviors.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the component that I would say, hey, that's important to do. Whereas the flip side of that being like, oh, I know how I behave and I like how I do it and I
Yeah.
like taking advantage of people.
And I'm not
Sorry,
changing
that's
for
just scum.
anybody.
You're
Yeah.
garbage. Get out of here. Okay. So yeah, there's stuff
Kara's
like,
drawing a line in the sand for that.
oh, I have seriously have a zero tolerance bullshit meter for a lot of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just the way I've been for a very long time, and that's made it a very like isolating existence professionally, especially, is because when I run into it, I'm just like, I'm not going to work with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same.
You know, we finished the project that I signed up on. I recognize who you are now. Never again.
Yeah.
And
It's
that's a break of
very hard
trust.
to it's very hard to interact professionally or in relationships with people who are totally like not self-aware.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh
Like
fuck yeah.
I think the collective triangle we have right now is we're all like, yes,
yes.
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 I just like when Desi said that, I had this like flashback of all the different people in my life that I've encountered where I'm like, I hate this human, desperately hate this human because of that lack of self awareness. Where it's just like, I want to interact with you as little as possible, and I'm thinking specifically about like some employment situations that I found myself in.
I mean, and that's a huge part of the negotiation too. Not just knowing what you're willing to give, but knowing what you're not willing to give and knowing
Yeah,
when it's time to go.
yeah,
Like when the negotiation is not working, when you are not, equally giving concessions and when you're not seeing and hearing each other,
yeah,
eh, it's reasonable. Like yeah, like Fadi said, it's reasonable to pull away from that. It's
Hmm.
yeah,
you know, you gotta like at the end of the day, nobody's gonna protect you but you.
yeah. Well, and I think Goki had something about that. Knowing when to walk away has been a huge thing.
Hmm.
And I will say though that like again though, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, depending on where you're coming from, it can be really hard to know that you can walk away,
Hmm.
or to advocate, or that you have a right to advocate for yourself, or that your needs matter. Um, so, because I'm just thinking about some of the folks, like, because like in my work, we intersected a lot with the domestic violence community. And again, I don't. This can be a whole other show. Um,
It will
but
be.
one of the core key myths about that sort of type of violence is, why didn't they just leave? It's like, well, people, there's a lot of different reasons why people don't leave, um, and believing that you have a right to is part of it, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Because part of the abuse is making you believe that you don't have a right for anything better, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so it can be really tricky sometimes to navigate that self advocacy piece, because like we're talking about, it's fucking hard to self advocate because it's scary and
Yeah.
vulnerable.
Yeah.
Indeed.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have any questions rolling in there. So I think, shall we move on to topic numero deux?
Yeah, let's talk about consent.
Oh, yeah.
This is my favorite topic.
I think
Um,
this topic may require more conversation at another podcast. This is a big one. This is a big
yes.
I
one.
mean, again, we shot for 90 minutes. If we go over 90 minutes, I mean, I'm
It's
fine.
fine. It's fine.
So we're running with it. And but yeah, like if there is some topics of specifically about consent that we have to go into, maybe we will branch off and do that a different day.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Um,
But
just make notes.
um, so what's consent?
Are we talking about
Diction.
overarching
Yeah,
consent? Yeah.
yeah. What's consent?
I mean, my interpretation of consent is the understanding that your bubble does not automatically grant access to anyone else's bubble. And I mean that on like multiple surfaces. So like your mind, your body, your environment, your property, all these other things, right? So whenever we talk about entering or wanting access into someone else's bubble, there needs to be a conversation about that and being very direct about what it is that you intend to do,
Mm-hmm.
trying to approach said bubble.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how I visualize it.
I just add to that because I very much agree. Autonomy is a big piece of it. And if anybody's autonomy is in doubt or in question, then consent is not present or valid in those situations. And so I think there's lots of things that hinder autonomy, different forms of oppression and stuff like that. And so those things need to be factored into um, and considered when consent has been sort of given. I think about harmful workplace situations, right, where there's an imbalance of power, and saying no risks something, so that choice is not really a choice, right?
Right.
Because the autonomy is in question in that moment. So that's my thought.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with. I don't think I have anything to add to both of those. I like the bubble metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, everything the sun touches will be yours.
In the shadows, though, no one owns that. That's the chaos world. We don't go there. No,
Yeah.
but
No, I 100% agree. With both of you. Consent is not something that, going back to the kid thing, consent is not something that's like sort of automatically taught to us, like bodily autonomy
Mm-hmm.
and consent. It's not something that's really, because when people talk about consent, like especially now in today's culture, like 9 times out of 10 when people talk about consent, it's like mental health or sexuality.
Yeah.
And like when you're a beeb, you don't have, there's no sexuality, and you have half a brain. Um, so you're like considered less of a person, and you don't need to be taught consent, or your autonomy doesn't need to be honored in any way.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you grow up, that creates that sort of self-doubt cycle that inhibits your ability to negotiate. Kind of throwing
Mm-hmm.
it back to our first topic.
Mm-hmm.
well, I think it's kind of when we like I'm trying to remember my experiences with consent growing up. Like I can't actually have a visual memory in my brain of someone sitting me down and being like, "This is what consent is."
Mm.
Like full realization. Like I went to Catholic school, and there was just like there's zero conversation about consent. By the way, there's zero, solid zero.
Like
So
the most we get as kids is no means no, and that's
sure,
a pretty new thing
yeah,
in the grand scheme of things.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just it's one of those approaches where you have to kind of understand like the discussion about consent is um, more of I think like something you run into eventually in your life
Hmm.
because it's a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we're younger, things can happen like on a playground where someone pushes you or whatever, and you feel like I didn't like that was not cool. I didn't agree to that. I didn't agree to get pushed,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's when you start feeling that emotion inside of you that's just like, oh, I don't feel good about that. No,
Yeah.
right? And it's that slow experience of realizing there's going to be things that happen to you in your life that ooh feeling kind of bubbles out into, and then you learn the vocabulary for it.
Yeah.
Like I think you feel the emotion first of what it feels like to not have your consent in situations,
Mm-hmm.
and then you get the vocabulary later.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of where a lot of, I mean, my interpretation, maybe it's better now and schools are starting to push this and education is pushing this, and um but like
Well, I mean,
we're all almost in our 30s, so
I remember when,
Well,
like,
well, speak for yourself.
that's why I
when
said
we
all.
went into schools, elementary school specifically, and we were talking about body autonomy and stuff like that, and talking about
Yeah.
sexual violence. And we don't necessarily, especially with younger kids, we don't necessarily use the language and words of sexual violence, but we make it a lot about the feelings. Because you're right, Kara, we feel before we understand, right? We feel that something is not okay, um, before we really understand what's happening around us. And kids are very good at that sort of intuitive, this doesn't feel right. And so, like, one of the areas that we started was that it's okay for you to say no to a kiss from mom or dad, right? And I remember more than a few conversations with said parents around, like, well, that doesn't feel very good for my kid to say no to me. It's like, yeah, it probably bums you out because you want to give your kid a kiss goodnight or goodbye to go to school, or whatever. Very, very innocent, well-intentioned things. Um, but just because they say no that one time, it doesn't mean it's no forever. Um, and the reality is, you're teaching them a much bigger conversation about consent, or much bigger lesson about consent, when you honor their body autonomy, right?
Yeah.
So if they say no to a goodnight kiss, and you say, okay, how about a hug instead, or how about a fist bump, or whatever, um, goodnight fist bump. Um, what you're teaching goes a lot further than you're probably realizing, right?
Mhm.
Because in that moment, that kid is learning, oh, my no means something, right?
Right.
So, like, to go back to what you're saying, does no means no, it's kind of useless if we've been taught that no doesn't mean anything, right? Because I know there was a response to that where, like, later on in some of the sexual violence stuff, no does not mean convince me, right?
Yeah.
That's that sort of follow up, and there was a yes means yes thing, but even that is limited in certain ways. Um, it's hard to boil down consent conversations to a
Yes.
nice catchy hashtag, um, but again, no means no is optimistic, because we've been taught that no is a bad word.
Yeah.
No is rude.
Hmm.
No is
N-
conflict.
no is conflict. No means you hate that person.
Mhm.
Um, so it's all well and good to say no is no, but if we haven't made no safe, then it's pointless to advocate for that.
Hmm. Well, and it's about giving the space to have the conversation of why it's no. You know, I'll use an example for me is like I'm not a very physical person. Like I'm not a big hugger, and from a not just like a friend group perspective but a professional perspective and all these other things is people see me as being very withdrawn. I'm like, no, I just this is the second time meeting you and I don't want to crush our bodies together. Like that's that's really what this is right
Weirdo.
now.
Yeah.
But it's actually we can use the example of when Des and I first met, we were working together on a documentary project, and the person that we were working with, I'll remember this very vividly, but it was the first night that we had met, and everyone was giving hugs, and I think I put my hand out because I was offering a handshake, and it was like one of the first times where it wasn't Des and Alex had both kind of approached and said, "Yeah, that's cool. Like that's fine." Hands out
Just
and
like,
gave a handshake, and there wasn't like a weird thing about it, right?
Hmm.
Whereas most of the time people would either ignore the hand extension and just give a hug anyway, or they kind of like look at you like, "Okay, that's fucking weird," and whatever, right? But it was after I was able to spend some time with them, and I had this moment where I don't know if you were there, Des, or not, but that we were within a little group, and someone was just saying, "Oh, well, why don't you like hugs?" And I was just like, "Well, for me, hugging is like a thing to say goodbye to. It like really say goodbye.
mhm.
It's for my definition of a hug is I'm gonna hug you because I know I'm not gonna see you in weeks or months, right? That's
Mhm.
how my brain processes what the purpose of a hug is.
Yeah.
So when we're filming and we're seeing each other every day and there's only like 7 hours in between running into each other, like I don't need that much physical contact. Okay, I don't need it. So but it was the first time in my life where someone had actually had the decency to ask why instead of just making an assumption and then just putting that over there,
Mhm.
right? So that's where you have the conversations of like why it is important to have consent and why it is important for people who are just like not only for me to say if I run into people be like they're reaching out and they're gonna hug me and be like, hey, I don't hug, but that's cool, right? And then just be like fist bump, like I'll see you soon, kind of thing, versus what I've been seeing more in my life and in my personal relationships with my friends is like there's people now asking, Kara, can I give you a hug?
Mhm.
Hmm.
Or some variation of that. And that approach usually ends up with a much more positive result
Hmm.
than the reverse. So,
That's
you
how
know,
you get hugs, you ask.
that
Yeah.
exactly,
or
right?
sometimes I get a look and I'm like, oh, never mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sarah's not in the mood for hugs.
No, but
Good,
it's just,
good job.
I mean, it's just like this the setting and environment can affect everyone's comfort level,
Mhm.
right? Like Des and I were recently at a film festival and we were around a lot of people,
For many
like
days.
for many days. Most like and half of the people I didn't know, right? And
Mhm.
that makes me uncomfortable to like not a like oh gross uncomfortable. It's just a pressure that I have as being introverted and a little bit of like have social anxiety and all these other things. So it's just like having new people in my environment stresses me out,
Hmm.
right? So the tension builds and the stress builds and all these things kind of like get to this point where I'm just like any sort of grazing or touch can set me off into a bad mood because
Mhm.
that's not what I need right now. I need space right now,
Yep.
Yeah.
right? So when we talk about consenting and that approach to like physical touch, if that's what we're going to talk about kind of leading into this, it's like that's why it's so important because it's a literal physical visceral reaction
Yeah.
that can happen
Hmm.
to touch, even though the intention might just be nothing. Like it just might just be like, "Hey Joe, hey Des," right?
Hmm.
But we never know sometimes. And that's not to say that certain relationships kind of find their own way to navigate that. It's not always like, "Joe, can I touch your arm?" Like you know, but
But it's like
it's
that.
about kind of reading the room, right?
Yeah, and consent evolves. Like that's a
Yeah.
huge part of it. And I guess that is one thing I will add to your guys' definition is that what uh, consent is not just a blanket thing. It's just not
Yeah.
it's not a thing you write in concrete and then it hardens and then you never go back on that thing ever again. Because, some days I do want to hug and some days I don't. Some days I don't
Hmm.
want anybody to fucking touch me. And that's okay.
Well, I mean,
Right.
it's funny you mentioned that because I think that was a thing that I got a lot of blowback as an educator within the sexual violence sector. Um, is that and it was not sort of like well-intentioned comments or something like that. It's like, oh, so I got to sign a legal contract to consent to sexual activity. It's like, no, it's an ongoing negotiation, right?
Yeah.
And things evolve over time, and there are way more ways in which we consent or indicate our consent than just by saying things. If it was just about verbal stuff, well, it's not just about verbal stuff. There's
Mhm.
lots of ways in which we communicate our consent to other people, um, that I think is part of it. So, like people in a long term relationship, consent is going to look a lot different because I think if we're assuming sort of it's a healthy dynamic, then there's going to be body language cues
Mhm.
and other ways in which other forms of touch, let's say, that people are going to that they know is that they're consenting to whatever is taking place,
Mhm.
right? Um, but again, there's ebbs and flows, and sometimes there is verbal communication where it's like, no, we're not doing this tonight. I'm not into it, or what have you, right? So
Yeah.
oh, I was actually just there was a comment in here. Someone said, "Why do you have to justify your consent?" Which I think is a really important um, thing. I did want to highlight is just like
Yeah.
that is a key piece of it. I think when people make you feel like you have to justify your consent or like that you're not consenting to something,
Yeah.
um, I think that's when boundaries are being pushed,
Yeah.
right? When somebody's saying like, "Yeah, but why don't you want to hug?
Yeah.
Tell me why you don't like hugs."
Right.
convince me that you don't like hugs, or
Yeah.
convince me that I shouldn't give you a hug right now. You know, I think that's when you're. I think going back to negotiation, I think that's when you're talking about someone who's coming to that negotiation with really problematic intentions. You know,
Yeah.
that they're there to get their way. And
Mm-hmm.
that's it.
And I think there is a huge difference between like but why and like, and going and separating yourself from the thing. Like I would never challenge somebody's no in the first place, but if I
Hmm.
wanted to learn more about the no, I would not do so in the moment.
Yeah.
Like, especially if it were a
Yeah.
sexual thing. I would just break off, do something else, and then wait until things had sort of settled, and then come back and talk about that moment, which is what happened with the conversation with Kara with the hugs thing. It's
Hmm.
like we weren't like in the moment, like, why don't you want to hug us? It was later on, it was a curiosity because that's around our friend group, that's not a typical thing because we're all
Hmm.
very touchy, weird people. It's more of a what do you have to think about that?
Yeah.
It's rubbed off a little bit. It's a slow process.
I mean, it's only taken 4 years.
But Des, I think that's a really good way to, I guess, like advice to throw out there is, you can always, again, to go back to that negotiation place, come back and say, hey, I noticed this, and I'm really just curious, and if you don't want to talk about it, it's fine, but I'm just curious about this hug thing, or I'm just curious about like where you stand on hugs, or whatever. There's other ways to kind of approach the conversation after the fact that doesn't put somebody who's feeling uncomfortable on the spot in the moment, in the crisis moment, I guess I could call it that.
Yeah.
Probably too big of a word for it, but still just like recognizing in the moment is not the time to necessarily address
Yeah, because then it
discomfort.
doesn't feel like pushback.
Yeah.
It's like I want to reach a deeper level of understanding with you if that's okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It like
Yeah.
that's much better to me. Like especially when it comes to like high intensity stuff or like things that happen in a highly emotional moment. Um because it could have just been, I was just having too many emotions at the time and I didn't feel like I needed a hug or
Hmm.
things were too like it also the what was I going to say? The sort of drawing a line and respecting someone's consent and like somebody saying the no um a lot of the time like if things are good and it's a healthy relationship doesn't have anything to do with you. Like if you get
Yeah.
no'd, and it's like wanting to understand that is okay, but like addressing it in the moment feels almost insecure and combative.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, why don't you want to hug me? I'm perfectly huggable.
Yeah. I think it's where you get into some really sketchy vibes and areas is when the rejection from a no turns into coercion,
Yeah,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
and
that's where people need to be very, very conscious of how they approach stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I did want to say, like, rejection doesn't feel good. And so I think some
no,
people's response to rejection is defensiveness. And that can lead somebody to push the issue, press the issue, push boundaries, what have you. So, but again, that is more about that person's own feelings on, like, if I'm feeling the, if I went in for a hug and somebody didn't want it, and I was feeling rejected in that moment, I need to go back and check in with my own feelings and process my own sense of rejection by myself. I can't make my processing of rejection the other person's issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
It's not easy to do,
No,
and it doesn't make it feel any better. Um, but you create a healthier environment when you process your sense of rejection in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
You could go to a friend, right, and
Mhm.
say, "Hey, I'm feeling this way. This happened." You could explain it. Somebody who is totally removed from the situation. Don't trauma dump on people. Make sure you have consent from that person to dump on them. But for the most part, like, you can process that elsewhere, and I think that is a much healthier way. And then, like Des was saying earlier, then you could go back having processed your sense of rejection to that person, say, and then explore a little bit what that was about. Because I think Des is very right that like that rejection is not necessarily always about you.
Mhm.
That there's other things we don't know people's lived experiences, and that rejection of the hug or kiss or handhold or whatever it is has much deeper stuff that you have no idea about.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get too heavy into this stuff tonight because this might be another side chat or whatever it might be. But like that's where we're talking about when we say, um, we're in a culture where we we are in certain realms encouraging people to ignore consent,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where that's seen as the more desirable persona to run in your life. If you want to get what you want in the world, you just got to go out and get it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Capitalism.
but
Sorry.
no, yeah, but and that's what I mean too. Is like I didn't mean that specifically in like a sexual violence kind of setting, but I meant it
Yeah.
on a full scale of everything, right? Because when you start putting that ideology in your mindset of how you behave in the world, you are pushing the limits on people's consent,
Mm-hmm.
and you're pushing the limits on how people interact with you, and it's very for some people we can see it from 1,000 miles away and then we go like fuck no. And it's like what I'm very good at is just whoop, you know divert around it. But the unfortunate reality is like what we're saying is sometimes people are just in the path of that, or people target certain people because they know that they don't have the tools available to them to
Mm-hmm.
hold the consent,
Yeah.
right? Because they are being pushed on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a concern I have about our society. As I'm reading a few comments here too. It's just like Halibut Barn talking about, at your job they're throwing birthday parties for employees. Like, why? You know, if you want to
Office
collectively
culture.
office culture, the office culture. I don't have my glasses here to but it's one of those things where you go, if people want to celebrate their birthdays at the office, make it an opt-in process.
Mm-hmm.
Don't go into people's personal information, collect all the birth dates, and then just go say, "Hey, we got a cake for you. Let's go." Like, no.
I will tell you personally, um, so there was a period for probably about 5 years where I did not celebrate my birthday. I didn't want anybody to talk about my birthday. I didn't want anybody to get me anything for my birthday because my birthday almost always fell on or around Mother's Day, and that was like too painful of a parallel for me after my mom
Mm-hmm.
died, and it was like I couldn't in that time like feel good about feeling happy during that time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a hard thing for people to like the amount of arguments I got into with family members because I didn't want like a happy birthday text was fine, but like I didn't want a party, I didn't want any presents, I didn't even want Facebook posts, I didn't want people to come
Mm-hmm.
over and come do something. Like I just wanted to like sit with my sadness and kind of feel that moment, and I didn't want to celebrate anything at that time. And the amount of pushback I got for that was insane. Like it took a long time. And now I'm in a much better place about it and I feel okay about it. But like it it was a struggle for years trying to just let me just don't it's fine. Like stop. It literally has
Totally.
nothing to do with you whether or not I want to celebrate my birthday.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing where people approach certain aspects of like the dynamic of lived experiences too, right? Is just like some people will approach something and then they go, how could you not want this? right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
this is what I experience in my life all the time, and it's great. And I always use this, like, the introvert versus extrovert experience, right? Where people are just like, why wouldn't you want to go out to a bar and the loud noises and drinking and drunk people and all this stuff going on? Isn't it great? And then you turn around to an introvert friend or person and they go, no, it's not
That's
great.
terrible.
I want to get out of here. Right? So it's interesting how the self acknowledgement of, like, knowing that you might walk into something with the best intent,
Mm-hmm.
and the unfortunate kind of mismatch of something is just because people are different, and
Yeah.
you have to be a little bit self aware about that.
Yeah.
Well,
And if you goof up, you just say sorry.
yeah. Well, I was gonna say, like, again, it goes back to that sense of being humble, right? That, like,
Yeah.
you had the best of intentions, and you missed a piece of the puzzle. But that piece of the puzzle is a very personal, private thing that there was no way for you to have known, right? So the fact that somebody didn't want a birthday, didn't want a hug, or whatever, again, going back to what Des said, it's not about you. Their reaction is not necessarily about you. It might be, but I think it's on us when that moment happens to sit in our own discomfort. And like I said, to process that discomfort privately or with a consenting sort of party who's wanting to work through us, like a therapist.
Right.
Therapists are great for that. Um, Again, who is there to do that processing with us if we're not sort of prepared or equipped to do that processing by ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's an ebb and flow, and there's lots of complexities to it, right? But
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. It's an ever evolving thing. And like, you know, um like when I think about that too, I also think about like pronoun use. Like
mm-hmm.
like you know, it's and also that kind of and it kind of goes back to what Faji about was saying about like explaining yourself. And it's like that was one of the biggest um walls with me with like because I was like sort of slowly coming out to people and being like, hey, I would sort of prefer they them, or I would prefer not to be Miss or Ma'amed, and daddy, and
Dad.
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 Like I was doing sort of a slow rollout because the second you sort of make that announcement, it's like it's a choice you're making, and then everybody thinks that they are owed an explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, you're not, because it's not about you. It's about me. It's
Yep.
fine.
Yep.
It's 2 words. You can change them. It's okay.
Well, I think people get roped into, not roped into. I think it's normal and natural for us to settle into an understanding of the world, and then
Hmm.
when new variables are introduced, that creates some discomfort. And some people don't know necessarily how to. I was having a conversation recently with a friend about pronouns and what it means to claim they them, and what that usually means. You have to navigate having to explain things. Um, and again, I think I'm more willing to give people leeway when they're coming from a place of literally not understanding
Hmm.
than when they're coming to a place of like, yeah, I don't care about, you know, they them or
But
whatever.
why?
Yeah, but why? Please explain, justify it to me and convince me that this is legit. You know, like, I pay
There's a
me.
difference between yeah,
You
there's a
know,
difference between like giving a like having space to give a thoughtful explanation and then defending your choices.
yeah,
Like cuz you can tell when somebody asks that question like what the intent of it is.
yeah,
Is like am I going to get into an argument right now, or are you just going to accept my position as it is and you just want to seek a better understanding with me?
yeah, yeah. And again, it goes
Which
back to
is,
consent, right? Because like
yeah.
the level of which you're consenting to explain this is has certain boundaries to it, right? And some days you have more spoons to educate people, more
Mhm.
energy to educate people, and some days you don't.
No.
And I think it's important on other people to. It's important on us to recognize when somebody is not willing to explain it to us, right?
Yeah.
And Google exists.
Google
If you don't
exists.
know about something, you can go Google it. If somebody's not willing to explain it to you, you can go Google it. You know.
What was that look?
Huh?
There
What was
was a
that
look,
look?
Kara.
Oh no, I just the skepticism in my brain. I'm just like not everything on the internet is good though.
Oh no.
No,
Yeah.
fair enough.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a flippant comment in my
Yeah.
mind.
Of course,
Like
of course. I'm
like
just how my brain works. I'm just like, well, actually, the internet isn't your friend all the time. That was the look. That was the brain thought that was going through there at that moment.
No,
yeah.
but but also to that point, coming to the conversation with at least a level of context to me shows that you have positive intent with that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Like it, like, hey, I've looked some of this stuff up and this is, and like, even if it's fucking wrong, at least you looked it up. Like, and then I can correct you, and I feel like you're actually engaged in this conversation and you're not just dedicated to arguing with me, or like
Mm-hmm.
not dedicated to totally dismissing my stance on it,
Yeah.
the way I identify.
Not I have complicated feelings about the show because it's very much propaganda. But in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, when after Rosa Diaz came out as bi, spoiler alert, the show's 5 years old, so I don't really care about
Yeah, shut
that.
up.
Get with it, get with the program, people. But there was a scene where Terry was saying like it was something about you might meet them or they, and it's very rote, his response and stuff like that. And Rose's response is like, you looked up how to talk to your bi friend on the internet, didn't you? And he was like, yes. And it was a very cute moment, but I think it represents like kind of that shows, well, like someone was saying in chat here, it shows respect, right? It shows that like it's like, I don't know how to talk to my bi friend now. I'm going to Google it and I'm going to be really awkward about it, but I'm going to be vulnerable in that awkwardness, and allow my bi friend to
Mm-hmm.
correct me or guide me on how they want to be addressed in this particular manner. So, um, yeah, I
Oh.
mean, there's ways to go, and it was a very cute moment in the show. So, yeah,
He looked up how to talk to your bi friend on the internet. That's great.
Different results on that, I think. But it's yeah, no, I mean, just going back to the but why kind of approach of things, right? When we're dealing with consent, especially, is like we're talking about, okay, what does the rejection side feel like? But the curiosity side of a no is also just as important,
hmm,
right? And I think that's what we're trying to say is like when you approach a no with a curious mind rather than a defensive, aggressive mind, um, you get more answers out of it,
hmm,
right? Because it's all about the approach that you're trying to get an explanation from it,
yeah,
right? And I think one of the hard things to really approach is what Joe you're saying is like how many spoons do you have in a day, right? And I think that's also just part of like the chances of having a different expression of that each time, right? Like there could be a day where someone approaches that curiosity and you're just like spent, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just not a
yeah,
good day. Things aren't going to go very well. And that's just such a hard interaction to be in, right? It doesn't feel good on either side. And I think if we can start being cognizant of when that happens and just being like, okay, take a breath. We're just going to go ways. It's okay. Everything will be fine. And then come back together, like Des was saying, and then have that conversation later.
hmm,
Um, just that's the one thing that like I work on that all the time too, because for me it's just like I don't ask a lot. Like I don't interact with humans to an extent where I'm kind of asking those questions very often, um, just because I live alone and like these are the things that I do and exist in. I don't need to be like, hey Joe, can I ask for a hug? Like that's not a thing that I do. Um, on a very regular basis. So for me, I'm just like, fuck, okay, I really need to work on this. Like it needs to be a skill set that
Mhm.
I forget about sometimes, even as someone who um asks for that consent a lot from other people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's interesting that way too. It's just like I feel like over my life I've developed a very strong way to kind of protect my physical or emotional needs from for whatever needs consent in my realm of what I think consent is needed for. Whereas the skill set to approach people is like my weakness and things that I have to work on too, just because I don't have a lot of practice with it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think that's an important distinguishment. Is some people are just like, oh, I'm always so good at consent. I'm like, giving and receiving, it needs
Yeah.
to be both. You
Needs to be
can't just
both.
be a top or a bottom with consent, people. You need to be
You
a
gotta be a
verse
switch.
consenter. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what it needs to be.
Yes.
But I think a lot of that has to do with survival too. Like
Mhm.
like in certain cases, like
Mm.
yeah, you had to survive, and you put up those walls, put up those boundaries, put up whatever it is, however you want to define it, because you needed to, right?
Mhm.
And that it took more time later on in life, once you had built a sense of safety, to do the other way, to do the outgoing consent stuff, right? So again, I'm always wanting to advocate for people um, doing what they need to do to get through various situations. Like that's always been a big thing for me, but that's always been a big thing like in my professional experience, working where I worked and all that stuff, because it kind of goes unnoticed sometimes that I think survival mechanisms are seen in certain ways, and some have certain stigmas and stuff like that. So, but that feels like another can of worms for another
Write it
podcast.
down, Joe. Put
Survival
it in
mechanisms.
the Excel sheet.
Put it in the spreadsheet.
Put it in the
I'm
spreadsheet.
gonna put that in there right now.
Right? Do it
Uh,
now, or else we'll never remember.
no. Just for a little bit of inside baseball, I made a magical spreadsheet for the show, and
Yeah.
it's brilliant.
Including
I just
topic
wanted to
or
brag.
including episode IDs based
Yeah.
on date and stuff like that. It's very impressive.
I learned everything I know from the spreadsheet fetishist herself, Alexander Snow.
I'm surprised that's not her Twitter handle.
The spreadsheet fetishist, it will be. I have
There you
access
go.
to her Twitter.
Yes. Tell her I said that. That's what needs to happen. Oh my god.
Professional man eater / spreadsheet fetishist.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess maybe we just ask into the ether, like, do we have any questions about either topic? So about consent or negotiations that's kind of like popped up and we want to talk about it all?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Excellent, Goki. We're glad
Yes.
you're here too.
We're glad
you're here, Goki.
anybody's here for this moment. This is
Yeah.
great. This is great.
Yeah, we've been here just talking for basically 2 hours. I'm so excited that literally anybody is still here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and like again, people kind of boil down consent into just like physical acts, and like, or even most people just boil it down to just like sexual stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I need
Yeah.
a written contract with every girl I fuck or whatever. But consent, when you have a consent centered mind, when that's a thing that you're actively thinking about, like it just improves your relationships as a whole. And it also shows you what relationships are no longer worth pursuing.
Mm-hmm.
Because once you start to notice that stuff, like once you start to notice like the constant boundary pushing, or like people violating other people's consent, and even in small ways, it kind of shows you a lot about how that person interacts with the world, and
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of gauge what your level of trust is going to be with that person.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm not the kind of person to say like drop every person who's ever had ever had a
Cut off those
problematic.
connections.
But like, I think there are varying levels of trust that you can have with varying sets of humans, and like,
Yeah.
there are some people that I would hang out with at dinner, but I wouldn't necessarily go to an orgy with.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I was just gonna say, like, and just on that note, to sort of like add to it, their process or their journey is not your responsibility.
Mhm.
So even if there's people that you know that like you wouldn't go to an orgy with them, like guiding them along their journey is not your responsibility
Oh
either,
no.
right?
No, 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 no.
So don't feel bad about setting boundaries or cutting off connections or whatever if they no longer serve you. Um, maybe they come back into your life, maybe they don't, right? But that's
Yeah.
not your responsibility.
Hmm.
So
Well, I would almost say it's easier to lean into the people who respect your boundaries
yeah,
and
Yes.
your consent. Like that's an easier read, in my opinion.
yeah.
Um, it's the navigation of who to keep close to you should always make you feel better,
Yeah.
right?
And I think
And
when you go
safe.
through that sort of analysis and check in, it might make you appreciate that friendship more or that dynamic
Yeah.
more, whatever that dynamic is, even if it's like a boss dynamic, right?
Oh yeah.
Where it's like
I
if my boss respects me in this way, like damn, I like it sheds new light if you bring in that consent angle, right?
to
Yeah.
just to brag a little bit about my job situation. Uh,
You're very allowed to brag about your job situation, guys.
uh,
Here comes the flex, yeah.
Alex, like there, you, shut up. The sort of going in with the negotiation thing too. Like I pre working this job and working with Alex, I didn't know how to advocate for myself. I didn't know how to negotiate.
Hmm.
Because I was never treated by an employer like that was an thing to do, and that I was worthy of
Hmm.
asking for more when I needed it, or that my input was even valid or
Right,
valued.
right.
Um, but now, having worked in this space, especially with Alex, but also with all of the other amazing people that I know in the industry, and like being like, no, your decisions matter. You're valued. Your work product matters because it's a professional environment. Um, and like your no and your yes means something. That's given me strength to say no or yes and to not explain myself in other
Mm,
situations.
yeah.
Like, because I used to be that person who would like labor over a text message, and then I'm making this decision, but here are the 8 paragraphs on why I am making this decision, because I already feel like I need to justify this decision to you because I don't know that you're going to respect it automatically, so I just need you to know every single reason why. And I've let a lot of that go. I'll just be like, no, I'm not interested in that project, but I think it'll be cool. I'm just not interested, or whatever
Right.
it is. Like it's like, nah, like I'm just not feeling up to it. And if it's someone I feel like will like respect my explanation, or I think that explanation will help them as to why I said no, but maybe somebody else might say yes, then I can give that explanation and feel okay about doing it. But I don't feel like that explanation is owed.
Yeah.
And a
Right.
lot of that has been because of working with Alex and feeling valued. Hold on, let me do the fancy thing
Oh
again.
yeah, do the thing.
Ba-bow!
Oh, wow. Okay, what do you think about our approach to consent being dependent on our MBTI personality types?
The Myers-Briggs types? I don't know that consent is really a thing that's addressed in Myers-Briggs. To be fair, I don't know a ton about Myers-Briggs.
I
I
think
can't.
it's
I've done the
yeah,
test a couple of times.
I think it's a good like roadmap to how to approach different types of people.
Mhm.
I don't know if it really changes the direct consent questions or asks or things like
Yeah.
that.
I I think a thing that's coming to mind for me right now is like I think I'm very wary of boxes,
Mhm.
and putting people in a box. Like somebody might identify INTJ or whatever, um, but to not not overextend how much that says about that person, and let that person tell you what they need from you, right? So I think approaching an introvert, let's say, right, um, it doesn't necessarily need to be as you don't need to treat an introvert with kid gloves per se,
Mhm.
but when an introvert says, "Hey, I just need some space," to listen to that and not take it personally, you know.
Yeah.
And same goes for like an extrovert, right? I'm not an extrovert, but I don't necessarily take an extrovert, reaching out as a personal thing, right?
Right.
Um, it's it's a negotiation usually, right? When extroverted friends do approach, right? Um, we'll kind of talk about what our interaction is going to look like, and or I'll usually, if I need to, advocate for myself. But I find my extrovert friends who I have in my life, they actually understand that I'm more of an introverted person and need a heads up on dropping by or what have you, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I don't necessarily feel. I'm thinking about one friend in particular, and this is a friend Karen and I have in common. I don't feel that I need to advocate with her about what I need, or I don't feel worried about having to advocate about what I need, right?
Hmm.
Um, like I remember, like we met up recently, and she did the thing that we were talking about tonight, where she's like, "Hey, I noticed you're using they them pronouns, right? Um, I'm curious to know more about where you're at with that, right?" Um, and it, but she laid out that groundwork,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
right? And that again, to me, when I look at that as a relationship that was a value based, like that meant a lot to me. That
Mm-hmm.
she was asking me, she was questioning me, but it wasn't this like, well, why though,
Yeah.
kind of
But
thing.
why?
Yeah, why though? Um, it was coming from a place of pure 100% curiosity, and I know from as an extrovert, she needed that
Mm-hmm.
interaction and kind of thing, right? So,
Yeah.
anyways, that was a long tangent, but
Mm-hmm.
I think especially with the Myers-Briggs, like the personality types things, I think it again, meeting people where they are sort of
hmm
it helps it is not useful to communicate with a person that is in a way that is totally against the way that they normally communicate.
yeah, yeah,
Like the short call me, and or the like
Fuck,
or
I hate it so much.
or like for someone who needs to have the eye contact and the personal whatever, like having a big conversation over text message is not helpful for that person. And if you didn't
yeah,
ask about it, and if you didn't negotiate that previously, then you're just not communicating in an effective way.
yeah,
So like basically just taking everybody as individuals and communicating with them in the way that they communicate best,
yeah,
and trying to find a middle ground, because some people have really, really incompatible communication styles, and you have to, if you want to make that friendship, relationship, business relationship, whatever work, you have to find a middle ground in order to make that
hmm
function.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and again, like really want to like taking cues from people, right? I remember there's this one person that, you know, there was kind of mutual attraction between the two of us, and it didn't work out. But they would send essays, right? Text essays, and um, it happened to align that I'm also a text essay person. But it, I got the sense through the interaction that like, and they told me this eventually, but it was really important to them that I read the whole message and responded to most of what they had sent, right?
Hmm.
Like that meant a lot to them, that this was something that worked between the two of us and stuff like that. And so um and then there's other people where they send the 10 messages, 10 like single sentence messages. So you try and match where people are coming from, or you just accept that this is how they text, or this is how
Mm-hmm.
they message, or this is how they communicate.
I
um,
definitely have a 10 message friend, and I love her dearly. Um, but she knows that I have her text messages on mute, because the amount of notifications, like if I have too many notifications on my phone, it really makes me anxious. And if
oh
I
yeah,
hear my phone buzzing constantly, it really makes me anxious. Um, but I just communicated that to her. I was like, "Hey, like because of like you communicate in this way, and that's fine, but I'm gonna do this in response to that, because that's what makes me feel okay."
yeah.
And she's like, "That's fine. If it's super important, I'll just call you.
There you
Otherwise,
go.
I'm gonna send you these 10 texts in a row."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah,
I'll check them when I have a minute.
Yeah,
yeah.
like with the Myers Briggs thing, it's like the same qualification as I think it's a piece of information that your friends can offer to you as some like uh guides for things. So it's like people how like they want to, some people share their love languages or their attachment styles or all
Yeah.
those other things. They're tools to help kind of explain who you are to other people if you so please, right? But where the dangerous kind of side of it is, and I'm just reiterating kind of what you both said, is that when you start approaching people only solely on that one particular thing is
Yeah.
where you get into some problems. Like I'm sorry if there's people in here who are all about horoscopes. I've had such terrible experiences where people come up to me and they say, "What is your birthday?" Like people I do not know, like random people. And they'll be like, "When is your birthday?" And I'm like, "I'm not going to tell you my birthday." And they're like, "Oh, I bet you're a fire sign." And I'm just like, "You need to shut your mouth and walk away." because because that is like, besides the fact that maybe that does line up with something that I am in the horoscope thing, it's totally not a way to approach me as a person,
Hmm.
right? I'm a trust-based person. I need time, I need processing room. I need to know a lot about you before I even, go on anything about me, right?
Yeah.
Like that's how I analyze people.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting how like if people started talking about consent in the way of like horoscopes.
Kara, you're such a Leo.
Oh my god. I am not a Leo, but yeah, you know what
I
I
don't know.
mean. That's the whole point. Is like,
Yeah.
um,
It's reductive. And like yeah,
Yeah.
like Faji says, it feels reductive. Like
yes,
it's and we want to in an ideal world we want to imagine people complexly.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to do in this in this world of social media and 260 characters and whatever.
Yeah.
It's easy to reduce people to a single opinion or
hmm
a single moment or whatever, but if we endeavor to imagine people complexly and listen to them and
Hmm.
communicate and get that consent and negotiate when we can, then we can just be better people.
Well, I just want to connect that back to my comment earlier about what consent means to me and talking about autonomy. When we when we get reductive about a person based on an aspect of their identity, we're reducing their autonomy, right?
Mhm.
We're making them the spokesperson for that particular group. We're putting a lot of responsibility on the stereotypes that group that might be associated with that group, fair or not. Um, but again, when we reduce people to an aspect about who they are, we're not respecting their autonomy as an individual, as a human being, and that again is hugely problematic.
Yeah. Yeah.
hmm
Yeah.
Okay,
Guys, I
do we
think we
Cool.
feel?
talked a lot.
Yeah, are
We
we
did.
feeling pretty good about everything? Yeah,
Yeah, any
yeah,
last questions, comments, concerns from
yeah.
chat? You guys have any last minute questions? Or things you want to anybody have any future topic ideas? We're still
Yes,
curating a
yes,
list.
yes.
Hmm.
Is there anything specific? We're kind of talking about things all around the spectrum, social things. We'll eventually get a little more spicy with our conversations because at some point I'm gonna start talking about porn. um
But like, it can be broad questions or like something very specific too.
yes.
Like, we can
Yeah.
navigate that. Oh, thank you. Just big compliments. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Also, constructive criticism or feedback
Yeah.
is also okay.
Hmm.
Yeah.
We want to make this a very accessible um, platform.
Yeah. Did you
Oh,
pick a
Goki, we have not.
We have not.
That could be a thing.
Uh we're talking about it. We have
It's
not
on
picked a
the,
time yet.
yeah,
It's
it's
on
on
the
the
list.
list.
Also, I want you to see I'm so proud of my cat. He has just been snoozing the
Yeah,
entire
today.
time and did not get up in my shit. Oh, it's
Why did
11
your
o'clock.
lights just turn off?
11 o'clock.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it is 11 o'clock. Yeah.
You
This
have a
is
smart house.
I do, and it tells me when it's time to go to bed.
It's bedtime.
But I like that your cat is a big orange blob in the back of your.
Yeah. Well, it
Yeah.
can
That's his
barely see now.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's his chair. Pippin.
Um, But Goki, you were asking that question because you want to talk about the doc because you watched it recently. So I
Yes.
realize we will have to maybe make sure that's soon
Yes.
rather than
Yeah.
not soon.
Yeah.
So
We will do some form or function talk about the documentary. Don't know exactly what that'll look like yet, but we should do that soon.
mhm, indeed.
The date
Maybe
for
we
that
can
is
do
TBD.
well, the next show
2 weeks from now.
2 weeks. So we're gonna try and do this every 2 weeks. The schedule may change, as we have different things come up. My
Mhm.
schedule's a little more chaotic, depending on if travel is happening, which it doesn't look like it's happening for a while. So, so the next one would be on the 17th.
Okay.
Same time but different channel. I think
Yeah, I think
we're
Yeah.
we're
gonna.
going to Joe next.
I
So
think
Joe,
it's
do you
my
want to
channel
type
next.
your channel into the chat?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
We're gonna
Goki,
be
you got notes.
yes.
That is
We're
my channel.
yes.
Right.
We're gonna be switching hosts every week. So we'll just do a rotation, and
Yeah.
Joe will be next, and then the week after, and then 2 weeks after that, it'll be Kara.
Yep.
Yeah.
Also, can you type in our Discord real quick? So if there's folks here who feel like they want to be part of something more, we have a channel for this show now.
Maybe. Let's see if I can get the link. Hold on.
But basically, it's a sub channel within a Discord. So the Discord is actually from Joe and my's 2NPC realm.
Mhm.
But like, know that you can choose how you want to interact with that. If it's
Yeah.
just the show that you want to interact with it, just pick that channel and ignore the rest.
Yeah. And if you're hanging out here from CL's Discord, it is not CL's Discord. It is not a porn Discord.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for that qualifier.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
We have I think we've done a very good job of describing what the channel is for and what is appropriate in there and what is considered behavior that we will not tolerate. So
Yeah.
just be aware of that. Yes.
Just gonna make that disclaimer all the time, guys.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, it's fine. Otherwise, they're gonna have to deal with me on that end.
True.
Yeah, cool. I'm just like looking at the mod screen and I'm seeing like some familiar faces hanging out in here, which is like really makes me happy. And then some like new people, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. You know, I'm
Yay.
in a little bit of a moment. But yeah. So the reason why I said the Discord is if you come up with an idea or something you want us to talk about, you can just throw it into there.
Or actually other questions. So I noticed in chat people are like, I need some time to process. If you have questions about episodes that have passed, put those questions in, and we'll try and hopefully make some time in the next subsequent episode, to address some of those questions.
Yeah, we can do
I
a
think,
little roundup.
yeah,
Yeah.
and just say like, hey, people had these questions about our last episode, and we can talk about them for a little bit, and maybe connect it to the new topic, maybe not, but we'll try and address it as it comes up.
Yep.
Totally.
Love it.
Very good.
Very good. Alrighty. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us in our first inaugural episode of Lesson 3 NPC. I hope you all have a wonderful night, and remember, you're valid.
Mm-hmm.
Have a good night.
Bye.